Okay, somehow, it's not that I like to listen to myself talk, even though sometimes I don't mind it. Part 3 of my Release the Snyder Cut opinions, interpretations, thoughts from your friend from Canada, Reed. So yeah, Zack Snyder, if he has a version of this movie that might be 3 hours long of stuff he shot for most of 2016 and early 2017 before he was either fired or stepped down due to personal reasons, I believe that movie, that version of that movie is a real thing, because they would have finished most of the special effects then. And I think he shot a whole bunch of stuff that obviously Josh Whedon didn't use, or in Time Warner obviously didn't use? Yeah, probably. But I don't know how much of those scenes maybe are unfinished, or how much of that, because back then, remember, they were filming 2 parts. They were filming Justice League Part 1 and Justice League Part 2, because it was supposed to be 2 parts. It was going to be this huge spectacle of the Justice League fighting Darkseid and the New Gods, and all this stuff with mother boxes. I mean, Steppenwolf could have been a better villain. Maybe you bring in Mr. Miracle. Maybe you bring in Big Bertha. Who knows? You bring in Granny Goodness. There's lots you probably could have done. Darkseid is one of the greatest villains of all time. Darkseid is like Thanos, except like Thanos was the copy of Darkseid. Just like everything good Marvel does, like Deadpool was the copy of Deathstroke the Terminator. It is known. It's not a bad thing, it's just Marvel usually copies what DC does in comic book form, because DC usually does it first and usually does it better, and that's fine. But in the film world we live in now, Marvel Cinematic Universe has been owning and destroying DC for the most part, and it sucks because it could have been so much better. Now, I would still like to see this Release the Snyder Cut version. I do, even though I'm not a big fan of Zack Snyder and what he's done. I think he helped ruin the DC Cinematic Universe, and Patty Jenkins saved it with Wonder Woman, and then James Wan saved it with Aquaman, and then if you haven't seen Shazam, holy F, you need to see Shazam, because that movie is not only awesome and entertaining, it's like so good, it's like a Marvel movie because of its tone and the feels and the heart. Like, Shazam is amazing. Shazam needed more love in the box office. And there's a lot of good stuff going on in the future now, despite what Zack Snyder was trying to do. Now, yeah, Zack Snyder cast Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman, and Zack Snyder cast Jason Momoa as Aquaman. That's great. Awesome. But Patty Jenkins made Wonder Woman Wonder Woman. Okay? James Wan made Aquaman. Zack Snyder didn't do that. Yeah, there are elements. I mean, Wonder Woman and Batman v Superman was really good. Wonder Woman and Justice League was confusing. There were 2 different tones there. And at the time, they didn't realize Wonder Woman was going to be one of the most successful superhero movies of all time, let alone one of the best. And Aquaman, you know, parts of Aquaman and Justice League were good or bad, depending. But that's the whole Josh Whedon, Zack Snyder tone, 2 different directors, 2 different thoughts. Here's the script, let's change it, let's reshoot it. Like, that's why Justice League is like a weird example in our day and age of what everything you can do wrong with a superhero movie, you did wrong with Justice League. And then they released it, and then they're shocked that it only made like $92 million opening weekend. When the word of mouth about how bad Justice League was, all the problems, all the reshoots were known, because it's the internet age. News is out there. You can't hide that stuff back in the day. Like, no one knew back in the day that Blade Runner with Ridley Scott was such a troubled production, right? That Harrison Ford said that was the worst film he ever worked on in his life. But, and it just, back then it was a different era. So now when there's problems on movies, like in Star Wars, when Kathleen Kennedy, that idiot, hires directors to make Star Wars movies and writers, and then she fires them because She didn't vet them properly. She didn't do enough background checks to find out that these people, the original directors of Solo, weren't a good idea. The original director for Rogue One maybe wasn't a good idea. That, the Game of Thrones writers were too busy. Like, it's a different age. So all these problems that were going on with Justice League while they were filming with Zack Snyder were well documented. And then when Zack Snyder left, they brought in Josh Whedon, reshoots, all that was well documented because leaks, footage, Instagram photos, all that stuff. It's hard to keep secrets now. So people knew, fans knew, people that are superhero people like me, like we're always on. We're on superherohype.com. We're watching YouTube videos. We're getting information on rumors and news and casting and thoughts and stuff and leaks. So a lot of us already knew. And then I'm sure there were shows and news articles everywhere on mainstream media about problems with Justice League. So a lot of people were just like, I don't want to see that movie. And then that's what happened. No one really wanted to see that movie. It's crazy. Sorry, never gonna. Sorry. So, this release the Snyder Cut movement, originally, I was very much against most of these people on Twitter because they were being stupid, they were being fools, and they don't understand, they're ignorant on how movies work. Most of these people legit think there's a version completed with Darkseid and Green Lantern and all this stuff that Zack Snyder wanted to do, and Superman in the black suit and Superman with the beard that we saw. There's photos there's still production shots of an evil-looking Superman, in a weird Kryptonian black costume. These people thought this was just a movie that they just didn't release, and that's not the case. And when Kevin Smith tells you the movie's not completed, and you're still like arguing that fact, it's Kevin Smith. Kevin Smith makes awful, stupid movies. Kevin Smith smokes way too much pot, and he's a drug addict. But he's a big superhero pop culture guy. He's very pro-DC. He does a lot of great work on television. He does lots of good stories. He knows a lot of stuff about superheroes. So, Kevin Smith telling people the Snyder Cut doesn't exist in a working form that you could buy, that you could watch, fully finished, should be enough for these release the Snyder Cut Snyder tards. Now I'm into the focus of this video, on video 3. And that's my issue with fighting and arguing with them on the internet, which I like to do sometimes, is this movie doesn't exist. Even John Campea, a man from Canada, who has his own John Campea YouTube channel, used to be on Collider, used to be AMC Movie Talk, all that stuff. That's all I want. If you're a Snyder guy, if you're a release the Snyder Cut person, you know that movie isn't finished, right? It's not finished. It's not a function. It's not a full finished movie. It's probably mostly finished, but there's probably some key scenes that were never fully realized. And that's where you need the $30 to $50 million to finish the special effects, the sound editing, visual, concept art, like all that stuff that make a movie. Because movies aren't easy to make. And movies that are spectacles, that are superhero movies with fucking hundreds of special effects shots, maybe even 1,000, who knows. They're not easy to make. There's a lot of stuff going on in there. So, that's weird. That's weird. So, that's what I want this part of the video to realize. If you're a release the Snyder Cut advocate, you know the movie's not really finished. And if Zack Snyder does have a finished version, it's probably his version of what Justice League Part 1 should have been, which could have been great. It just, I don't fully blame Zack Snyder for this, okay? I blame Time Warner Brothers, DC Comics, everyone, Jeff Johns, overrated comic book writer of all time. I blame all those people for Justice League. I blame Zack Snyder for Batman v Superman, and I blame Zack Snyder for Man of Steel, because those movies, especially Batman v Superman, have major fundamental flaws and aren't very good. And over time, you can tell. I'll give you an example. Not every movie made stands the test of time, and not every movie is regarded as a classic. And some movies take time to become a classic, or what many people would call a masterpiece, okay? Now, in 1982, 2 movies came out that are universally regarded now as masterpieces. One, okay, so Blade Runner comes out in 1982. No one really sees it, but Blade Runner is probably the best art house Hollywood movie ever made. Now, you can debate Blade Runner doesn't have a very good story and blah, blah, blah. But the spectacle, the visual, the art direction, the cinematography of Blade Runner, the way it looked in 1982 was way ahead of its time. So Blade Runner over time, VCRs, you remember what those are, that became a cult hit and then universally became regarded as a masterpiece. The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing, also came out in 1982. Had the mistake of coming out a couple weeks after E.T. No one wanted to see an evil alien. John Carpenter's The Thing is probably now, in 2019, November 19th, whenever I'm filming this video, The Thing is my most watched movie of all time now, probably eclipsing Star Wars. And I could make an argument that John Carpenter's The Thing is one of my top 5 favorite movies of all time, and maybe number 1. The Thing by John Carpenter is regarded as a masterpiece now. As an example of movies that come out, don't hit, but okay. More recent times, last 20, 30 years, The Shawshank Redemption. Shawshank Redemption is now universally regarded as the greatest movie of our generation, of our time. Came out in 1994. It bombed at the box office. It received 7 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture, Best Actor for Morgan Freeman, Best Director, right? Didn't win anything. But it got 7 Academy Award nominations, and people were like, whoa, what is that? And then when Shawshank Redemption came out on video, that's where it hit. And people started watching Shawshank Redemption. And then it hit over time. People watched it at home. And it just grew and grew and grew. And then IMDb people started rating The Shawshank Redemption. And The Shawshank Redemption has been the number 1 highest rated movie of our generation for years and years and years. But when it came out in 1994, The Shawshank Redemption bombed. No one saw it. No one understood the title or anything. So that's another movie that has now become a masterpiece. It was a masterpiece, but is now regarded as the greatest movie of all time that no one gave a in 1994. Okay. 1997, Titanic. Titanic, one of the biggest movies of all time, comes out in 1997. Celine Dion, My Heart Will Go On, blah, blah, blah. James Cameron, King of the World, yada, yada, yada. Makes Leonardo DiCaprio a movie star, makes Kate Winslet a movie star. Wins 10, 11 Academy Awards, the most Academy Awards of all time, blah, 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 blah. Okay? It's now 2019. Go watch Titanic in the next couple days. That movie does not hold up at all. Now, in 1997, there's 2 other movies that were also nominated for Best Picture that didn't win. Good Will Hunting and LA Confidential. Watch those movies if you watch Titanic. Those 2 movies hold up very, very well. Man of Steel, 2013, comes out. Most people seem to enjoy it, like it. Watch Man of Steel now in 2019. It's not as good. And that's just 6 years. Batman v Superman. A lot of people like myself, it came out 2016 in March. Loved it, enjoyed it, but you digest it. If you're going to watch Batman v Superman, you need to watch the Ultimate Edition. That's a 3.5-hour version. Don't even watch the theatrical. Because if you watch the theatrical, that's the version I can nitpick all the time that many people have. Ultimate Edition stands up better because of all those included scenes. Now watch Justice League. That's 2 years ago, this movie. Watch this movie now. 2 years old. This movie, if you didn't like it then, you're especially going to hate it now. This movie is trash now. But when you first saw it, even I was willing to overlook it because I was working in Lac La Biche. I'm a big DC fan. There were parts of Batman v Superman I still liked in 2017. I was pumped about it. My friend Catelyn was driving me to Lac La Biche. We bought movie tickets. We're going to see fucking Justice League in Edmonton. Late night showing. Drive back. I even have a YouTube video, if you want to look, about my reactions to Justice League that night that I filmed at like 4 in the morning. I was super pumped, and there were things about Justice League I really liked. But now, 2 years later, this movie's painful to watch. I'd rather watch Black Panther or Captain Marvel than Justice League, and I'm a pro DC guy. So, release the Snyder Cut. If he has a finished version, mostly finished version of what he thought Justice League Part 1 was going to be, I would love to see that. If he has more than that isn't finished, it would be nice if they could finish it or do what they could. The 2-year anniversary release of Snyder Cut, especially on Twitter, was trending big time. It was trending more than it's ever trended in the last couple years. Gal Gadot was tweeting release the Snyder Cut. Ben Affleck, who's no longer our Batman anymore, was tweeting release the Snyder Cut. Other filmmakers, the creative head of Watchmen TV series, Damon Lindelof, one of the worst writers of all time. He was one of the idiots responsible for Lost and that whole debacle of what went wrong there. Even though he's killing it with Watchmen on TV right now on HBO. But lots of people were extending their support to Zack Snyder on the 2-year anniversary of Justice League on Twitter and social media, released the Snyder Cut. And then Warner Brothers came out yesterday and said, yeah, that's cool, we're not going to release it. So, but that was the most release the Snyder Cut has trended in almost 2 years, was the 2-year anniversary of Justice League. And it was nice to see. Now, even though I'm anti-Snyder-tard, and I'm anti anyone who would call Zack Snyder a genius, because lots of these Snyder-tards do, and it's painful. Zack Snyder's not a genius, okay? Zack Snyder made 3 really good movies, and then he made Sucker Punch, which was one of the most horrible movies of all time. And then he made a pretty okay Man of Steel movie, and then he made a deeply troubled Batman v Superman movie, and then his parts of Justice League, who knows? Because Zack Snyder was still on the dark is good, gloomy is good, depressing is good. That's not the takeaway from the Nolan Batman movies. And maybe Zack Snyder's, not a perfect movie person, but that's not the takeaway from the Nolan trilogy of Batman movies, that they're dark and realistic. Superman isn't that character. You got that wrong. You can make him an alien who doesn't understand stuff and is confused and blah, blah, blah. All you needed to do with Man of Steel was have Superman, Kal-El, save some lives in that movie that weren't Lois Lane and Martha, his mom. And people that criticized the action scenes would have been satisfied. That's all you had to do. But he wasn't smart enough to figure that out. Superman is the hope of the DC Cinematic Universe. Superman is the hope of all superheroes. Batman is the dark. He got Batman right with Batman v Superman. Ben Affleck was amazing. Ben Affleck is the best Batman we've ever seen. And it sucks he's no longer going to be Batman. The man who legitimately has a Batcave in his house for years and years and years didn't want to be Batman anymore. Let that resonate. Zack Snyder had lots of potential on things, but I don't know. I do want to see his version of Release the Snyder Cut. I do. I think there's probably some good stuff in there, but I bet there's a lot of shit. The same old stuff that people that, Zack Snyder's not a genius. Zack Snyder has a lot of issues with story and complex scripts. He wasn't being super thought-provocative. He was too deep for himself, and that's not what people wanted from superhero movies. You can be a little, you can have little gems, little kernels in there, but that can't be the foundation of your movie. It shouldn't be a theme, right? People go to superhero movies to get away from their lives, to enjoy them. Zack Snyder DC movies weren't enjoyable. like Star Wars movies aren't fun anymore, right? The Last Jedi divided the entire Star Wars universe because it wasn't a fun movie. But then you watch episode 1 of The Mandalorian, and regardless of what side you are in The Last Jedi, that's a whole other thing. The Mandalorian is fun. It's entertaining. The Last Jedi wasn't super entertaining. There's a lot of PC, a lot of agendas, a lot of, politics. And Zack Snyder was kind of the same way with the DC Universe. Movie-going fans and people that were DC fans were like, no, we don't want this. Like, we don't. And that's a reality that Snyder tards have to realize, is that the movie-going audience was already turning away from Zack Snyder before Warner Brothers and Time Warner were. So, who knows? Could it have corrected itself? Maybe. Did people think the Joker was going to make $1 billion? No. I thought maybe the Joker would make $500 million worldwide, and that was me being optimistic. And at the time, I didn't want to see Joker at all. I've done a YouTube video about I was worried about the Joker. And then I saw the Joker, and it blew me away. It blew me away of how it, like, not the seriousness of it or what it touched upon, what the movie was really about, but that's something Zack Snyder can't do, right? He wanted to do that. Zack Snyder wanted to make Christopher Nolan-like serious movies, and he probably would have wanted to make a movie like The Joker. But Zack Snyder gets confused when it comes to dark, 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 gloomy, 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 real life equals depressing. He doesn't get it. You can have elements of that sprinkled, but it can't be the entire theme of the movie. That's why people turned away from Man of Steel. All that destruction, all that cinematic death, all those people in Metropolis probably died, right? And then 18 months later in Batman v Superman, it's mostly rebuilt. There's a statue for Superman. The world mostly loves him. What? That's the issues with Zack Snyder and his cinematic vision. Now, Justice League could have, who knows? But then again, then you bring in Cyborg, right? Awful casting. Sorry. And then you eliminate most of that story. Like, Cyborg shouldn't have been a member of the Justice League. Sorry. Flash, at the time you're like, yeah, some of his scenes were really funny, but then now you're like, Ezra Miller, that's not Barry Allen. You have a really good Flash on the CW. You also have a really good Green Arrow, Oliver Queen, on CW. Right? Just like we had a really good Lex Luthor on Smallville for like many, many, many years. The DC Universe comics is a multiverse. Arrow's doing this Crisis on Infinite Earths, was one of the greatest superhero stories of all time. 1985, Marv Wolfman, George Perez, creators of the New Teen Titans. That was one of the first stories I ever read as a kid. DC needs to remember that it's a multiverse. And they need to bring in the 1978 Superman world, the 1989 Batman Tim Burton world. They need to bring in all their stuff from the past. A Smallville Earth, Arrowverse Earth. Like, I know Flash and the CW have different Earths, but the DC Cinematic Universe and everyone who's running DC films, comics, you need to establish the multiverse and just put it out there. Earth 1, Earth 2, Earth 3, Earth 4, Earth 5, Earth 6, Earth 7. And you fucking nail it down. This is where Doom Patrol and Titans are. This is where Arrow and Black Lightning and Batwoman and the Flash are. This is where Supergirl is. This is where Tim Burton's Batman is. This is where Christopher Reeve's Superman is. This is where the Zack Snyder universe is. This is where Joaquin Phoenix Joker is. This is where Watchmen is. That's what they need to do. So, that's my 2 cents of me talking. 3 videos. If you watch this, I appreciate it. Thanks. If we ever get a version or release a Snyder Cut, I'm thinking maybe we'll get it in 10 years. I hope sooner. It'd be cool if they could do something with HBO Max. If he does have a finished version, I mean, it would be smart for Warner Brothers to want to make money off of it, but then again, they don't benefit because Ben Affleck's no longer our Batman. Henry Cavill might not be our Superman anymore. We still don't know what's going on there. Ray Fisher, Cyborg, he doesn't have a career anymore. He's done. That's not happening. There's a Cyborg on Doom Patrol, isn't there? And that's not even, like... Yeah, and is that Flash movie ever going to be made? There's a lot of problems still with DC, even though there's been a lot of successes despite what Zack Snyder did. Thanks for watching. Cheers. Thanks for watching. Release the Snyder Cut. 3 videos. Just like at one point, Zack Snyder thought Justice League was going to be 3 movies. Cheers. Have a good day.